Kira and Odo are having coffee together. To be more specific, Kira's having coffee and Odo's trying to avoid talking about the one time he tried food to see what the experience was like. We're interrupted by the arrival of someone new, and as they're played by Jeffrey Combs, they're probably important, so let's drag out the wheel of names. For those of you who are new here, the wheel contains names suggested by patrons of the channel, and when I can be asked, we use it to label characters that we're never going to see again. Our newcomer will be known to us as Butch Patterson, suggested by Lieutenant Red Sable. Old Butch here was all up in Kira's business last night in Quark's, and that attention does not appear to be reciprocal. So much so, in fact, that Kira introduces Odo as her lover. He's thrown by it, but manages to recover well enough to engage in the conversation, and learning that he's chief of security makes Butch Patterson take an even more intense dislike of him. Kira and Odo pouring their fake relationship on as thickly as they can is enough to make him leave. She thanks Odo for the ruse and goes to work, leaving him with some very conflicting emotions. Speaking of conflict, Sisko's convinced Starfleet that we should still be going through the wormhole to explore. Quite how they've reconciled that against the Dominion saying they lay claim to the area is another matter, but we're doing it anyway because we didn't make these Defiant sets for nothing. It's just standard exploration from the looks of things, so we shouldn't be surprised when Dax notes a science wibbly and we decide to give it a poke. Our disappointment at only finding a star soon changes when the wibbly causes a bit of shaking and we discover an entire planet has just appeared. The surprise planet offers a second surprise by scanning us and a third by giving us a ring. The face on the screen introduces herself as Seltin and invites us down for breakfast and explanations. Seltin introduces us to her group, though says it's been some time since they last took a meal together. The reason for that is connected to their little planetary magic trick. See, Meridian, which is the planet we're on, has a tendency to pop into a different dimension every so often. A lad called Doral, who seems rather taken with Dax, has been studying the phenomenon for a while and thinks it has something to do with the system's star. This other dimension is a bit of a weird one too, as there's no material existence there, just thought. The physical planet and its inhabitants are kept unchanged while there, which might be a bit awkward if one of them was in the middle of taking a shit. Still, not aging probably makes up for it. This ethereal existence lasts 60 years though, according to Doral, so sliding back into meat space is a cause for celebration and relearning the pleasures of food, or other delights. Butch Patterson is in Quark's, enjoying the entertainment. Actually, that's not true. Butch Patterson is in Quark's and not enjoying the entertainment. His selection of what is implied to be hollow porn wasn't doing it for him, and Quark's other suggestions don't spark any interest either. The problem is, old Butch knows exactly what he wants, but there's no program for it. That sounds like an opportunity to Quark, not least of which because he can charge through the nose for a personalized program. Just one problem, though. His request is for a holographic Kira. For Quark, the problem is one of logistics rather than ethics, as he'll need to get her into a holosuite to scan her for a copy. She'll kill him if she finds out, of course, but the amount of money he's being offered can pay for a really good funeral. Down on the planet of the ghosts, Dax and Doral are having a chat, so it's time for the obligatory lore dump. The 30 or so people who live here are the descendants of people who arrived thousands of years back. The population hasn't changed much for quite a while, as they can only do sexy times while in meat space. That's become increasingly problematic, as whatever's causing the jumps has been slowly changing. Each period spent back here has been growing shorter, and this current one will be over in under 2 weeks if Doral's calculations are right. Assuming their young gestate for 9 months like humans, that would mean the next generation won't be ready for over 1,000 years. All of which is irrelevant, as once the time spent in meat space becomes so short that the planet can't get used to being here before the next jump, the whole thing will just end. Sounds like a puzzle, and you know what Starfleet are like with those, so we're going to take Doral with us and go fiddle with their star to see if we can't figure it all out. Quark has had an idea. A fake message brings Kira to the bar and, with the help of an underling, he pretends to be surprised to discover that she's his 1 millionth customer. She's not interested until she learns there are prizes involved. The idea of Quark giving things away for free should have made her realize it's dodgy, but free stuff is free stuff. She'll take the champagne and free spins on a Darbo wheel, but decides the complimentary holosuite time would be better appreciated by a friend, as she doesn't really care for them herself. Over on the Defiant, we've already been useful. We've shown Doral the science wibblies we detected before Meridian reappeared, which is obviously something he's never been around to check for himself. Farting a probe into the star will teach us more, but we'll have to wait for the data. Might as well wait on the planet if they're only going to have it again for 12 days. Dax and Doral are walking, and the conversation turns to him having a dead wife. Obviously very sad, but he's had at least 60 years to get over it, and it would appear Seltin has been wanting him to find a replacement. They do have a population crisis after all, and the periods to do something about it are getting shorter. This advice is running contrary to his current course of action, though. The attention he's been showing Dax has not gone unnoticed by the rest of his group, but it's really none of their business, so bollocks to them. Besides, it's not like the attention isn't reciprocal. Time's cracking on, and we still have a planet to save. Initial results from the probe aren't very useful, and Doral's becoming frustrated. Cisco calling them is good news then, as he's managed to jam the probe a bit further into the sun, and we're getting new data. This new information is very useful indeed, and Dax is able to tell that science bollocks is causing science bollocks in the science bollocks, and this is what's making their time in meat space get shorter. That also means they can fix it if they can figure out a way to do different science bollocks to the star. While Dax and the Defiant crew get busy, we'll move back to the station. Quark's attempts at stealthily recording Kira for Butch Patterson aren't going too well, as Odo's spotted him. Kira's not delighted by this turn of events and demands an explanation. Rather surprisingly, Quark tells her the truth. Well, bits of it. He admits he wants to make a copy of her for a holoprogram, but instead tells her it's for a simulation of ops because people are curious about what goes on up there. As lies go, it's a pretty terrible one, as the last 2 years has proven any random dickhead on the station can just walk in there whenever they want. It's understandable then when Kira remains unconvinced and threatens him with casual violence if he keeps trying to take an image of her. Back to the magical disappearing, reappearing planet we go, and Dax is telling Doral we've figured out how to do a science bollocks to stop all the other science bollocks and keep them here for longer. That's what Doral wants to hear, and he talks about building a new home with space for Dax to visit when she's not working at the station. A slight problem, the planet switches back to ghost space in 5 days, and it's going to take longer than that to fix the sun. Doral's plan to build a shag shed will have to wait 60 years. That's a bit much for him, so he has an alternative solution. He'll leave the planet and come with us instead. Seltin's making plans for the planet's future after hearing the news, and Dax doesn't feature in them. She's not subtle in her expectations for Doral, and Dax leaves him to share his decision with them all. He rejoins Dax up on the Defiant while she's talking to Bashir, who, to his credit, isn't making it all about him. Doral's people are obviously not chuffed at the prospect of him leaving, but he's resolute. He nips off again to go and say goodbye, which feels like a thing he could have done before teleporting up, but maybe he wanted to give them a few minutes to absorb the news. We'll give him some time too and rejoin Quark on DS9. Butch Patterson is visiting to find out how his custom order is coming along. Quark presents a data rod, though it's not the merchandise. This is one of his hacking tools, though he says it's a new one. Maybe that's true, maybe he just wanted to charge extra. Either way, he says this is what will get the data he needs, and old Butch departs with a passing threat if Quark buggers things up. It's bad news for him, then, that Odo is speaking to Kira shortly thereafter and telling her somebody hacked into her personnel profile. It doesn't take a genius to work out who, and Odo wants to go grab him, but Kira has a more subtle idea. To the planet once more, and Dax is visiting Doral on the surface. She can tell he's distracted and concludes it's because he doesn't want to leave. Knowing that he'll be weakening an already small community is weighing on him, though he reassures her that he'll do it anyway to be with her. She'd expected something like this, which is why she tells him she'll stay here instead. He argues that isn't possible because science bollocks, but she's already thought of that. She and Bashir have concluded that doing a science with the teleporter will make her body match the science bollocks here, so she can survive the transition to ghost space. If Seltin's main argument is not wanting to lose people, she can hardly complain at gaining one, can she? Even the 24th century has paperwork, and Dax is filling forms explaining to Starfleet why she'll be gone for 60 years. Here's hoping they take the news well, as the punishment for over half a century of being AWOL might use up the 30 years of meat space time that the planet will have when it returns. Sisko's visit is for the obligatory check to make sure this is what she wants. He already seems to know the answer and is just checking for his own peace of mind and to say goodbye. Speaking of goodbye, let's finish up the B-plot. Butch Patterson is back for his hollow porn and goes to sample the results. What starts out promisingly turns into something that doesn't quite fulfill his requirements. Old Butch registers his displeasure with Quark, and Kira and Odo make sure they're present to witness the fallout. And speaking of results, Dax has had teleporter science done to her by Bashir and is ready to go. Just as well, really, as the planet is due to wibble itself away in under an hour, so it's time to teleport down. She's welcomed by Doral, and Seltin has warmed to her now too, after learning that she'll be adding to their numbers instead of subtracting from them. Those on the Defiant watch the planet start to disappear back into the wibbly, only this transition is having a little trouble. The inhabitants of the planet cycle through ghost form and back again with no change to Dax, all while the ground shakes. The others disappear, leaving her alone, and the settlement starts to bugger off too. The Defiant crew can tell something's gone pear-shaped, and the something is Dax. We teleport her back onto the ship as the planet disappears, and it's probably just as well, as she was starting to suffocate. We're back on the Defiant and flying home. Sisko's checking on Dax and letting her know the planet slipped into ghost space just fine once she was off it. It's cold comfort, but maybe she can have another go in 60 years, so we'll leave her to come to terms with her loss and presumably spend another 6 hours unsciencing herself in the teleporter until the next adventure. It's another Dax episode, and that means we get to go on another of my little delves into what it means to be a joined trill. Don't blame me, you buggers said you liked them. This time we're going to cover something the episode didn't touch upon at all. Moving from meat space into ghost space makes all the inhabitants of Meridian turn into pure consciousness, yes? All well and good for most species, but Dax isn't most species, is she? How do we know that Dax's transfer into ghost space would work out the way she expects? If this other dimension is one of pure thought, it could just as easily result in the splitting of all her former hosts' personalities. Most of them might be fine with that, and may even welcome it for that matter, but would Duran the Stabby Boy be okay with it? How would the other people sharing ghost space with him react to the pure thoughts of a murderer? In fact, there's no guarantee that Jadzia Dax would even survive the process, at least in the form she is now. The mind of Jadzia the host and Dax the symbiont might split in the process, causing a fundamental change of the person Doral is choosing to be with. What if he finds he fancies the bellyworm brain more than the host? We're into the territory of me pulling ideas out of my arse again, but that in itself is quite telling. These are ideas that could have been discussed during the episode by Doral and the group. How might Seltin's eventual welcome of Dax be coloured by the knowledge that she may unleash 60 years of torture on them all? I've said previously that having every Dax episode be a symbiont episode risks making her a one-note character, but there's a difference between it being the focus and it being something to consider in an otherwise unconnected plot. A little exploration of these possibilities would, for me at least, have been more welcome than the Hollow Kira B-plot. Speaking of which, we should probably touch on that B-plot, as it's an example of Trek being slightly ahead of its time again. This year, the UK finally got around to addressing the spread of explicit so-called deepfake images and videos by creating a new offence. This is the UK, so naturally they bungled the whole thing by linking it to intent rather than consent, but the connection with our episode is a clear one. How do you police the use of somebody's likeness in media that can generate imagery? The episode itself doesn't address the issue, only considering intervention when Quark has broken security to gather his data. It leaves alone the question of how 24th century society has grappled with an issue that we're only just starting to handle ourselves now. The interactive nature of the medium opens up a whole swathe of problems even before you start to consider the potential sentience of the simulation. That it's played for lols here is disappointing, but not particularly surprising. Trek may like to dabble with being progressive, and accidentally stumbles into being more so than intended on occasions, but there would have been no appetite for an episode talking about the future of legal rights in a world where holograms exist. We'll have to content ourselves with it being thwarted rather than actually addressing the issue. Last, but by no means least, we should note that this is the very first episode of Star Trek to feature a certain Mr. Jeffrey Combs. If you're watching this, you likely already know that this is very much not the last we'll see of him, not just in DS9, but in other Trek shows as well. What I didn't know, however, was that we could have seen him much, much earlier if history had taken a slightly different course. It came as a surprise to me to learn that he auditioned to play the part of TNG's serial shagger, Will Riker. Even more oddly, Jonathan Frakes, who actually got the part of Riker, was the person who cast Combs in this episode as he was directing it. It's fascinating to consider how much both shows could have changed if the dice had fallen a little differently, but I doubt what's to come in DS9 would have been anywhere near as enthralling as it is if Combs hadn't been able to be a part of it. Oh, and for those of you keeping track, he's yet another member of the Babylon 5 crossover club, because of course he is. End of episode.
Alright, I'll admit I might not have been given this current situation the respect it deserves.
Really? And to think I believed you were genuinely looking for clues on the Bajor sightseeing tour.
Well, what do you suggest then? You're the bugger who spoke to this Morden lad and got the job.
I don't know, the only thing I can think of is following up on one of the other job offers we got from the same place, and seeing what we can learn.
Oh, that's actually not a bad idea, and probably something we should have thought of before.
To be fair, we have the excuse of being dogs. Besides, getting in contact might be dangerous, so I've been trying to think of another way.
Bollocks to that, I'm bored now. Which one do you want to take a gamble on? We've got Founders Incorporated, Jemadar Holdings, or Voter and Associates.
What difference does it make if they're all going to the same person?
It don't really, but recapping details from earlier episodes is standard procedure for Star Trek.
Fair enough, woof.